So, thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about something somewhat tangential to Agile, but super important. And it's that, hey, that stuff that you're putting in your backlog, it doesn't mean anything, right? What I've noticed is that we just burn down a backlog over and over again in Agile. And I don't think we spend enough time having a healthy skepticism of the work. In that, is this going to provide something meaningful in the world? Is it going to solve a real problem? And so today, a lot of the stuff I'm going to share with you are things I do with Fortune 50 companies, some here in the Bay Area, some around the world. And we'll practice a little bit today, as much as we can. And then I'm also around for questions, so we'll do a Q&A at the end. So a little bit about myself. David Bland, I'm a principal advisor at Neo. Neo was founded by Joey Ito, who runs MIT Media Lab, and Ian McFarlane, who used to be engineering lead at Pivotal. And then our general partner is Eric Rees, who wrote Lean Startup. And the whole premise of the company is really based on moving from can we build it to should we build it, okay? That's the important part. I feel like we can build anything today, but now the next question is, should we be building this stuff? We're actually finally figuring out Agile. It only takes us 10 or 15 years, and we're figuring it out. But now it's really tragic in that we're still iteratively delivering things that nobody cares about. So how do we solve that? Before Neo, I was a principal at Big Visible. Some of you might remember Big Visible. And also, I've been at 3 different startups. So first one was acquired. The other 2 were not. And I learned Agile. Actually, good story. I learned Agile at my first startup in about 2099 when I joined. Our CTO declared, "We're Agile." And that was it. So I had to learn Agile at a financial services tech startup without any guidance, doing front-end development and design and leading multi-million-dollar financial implementations. So a failed sprint in that regard would be basically just fold things up on your Aeron chair and wheel it on out to your car. So that's how I learned Agile. Shocker, I learned some really, really bad things that way. And then it wasn't about till 2008-09 that I finally started to get it. So just a note, if you're going to declare that you're Agile, probably have some kind of like support system to back that up. So one of the reasons I'm here is because I see far too many Agile teams stuck in this loop. So they start off with like, hey, nobody uses our stuff. Let's go talk to customers and ask what's missing. And then, whoa, that stuff's in our backlog, so let's go build that. And then nobody uses your product. And they basically go through that several times until your people quit or it becomes a zombie project. And zombie project in the sense that it doesn't really die, but it lives on and eats like 25% of your time, and you get bugged and email every now and then how to fix something on it. But basically, it never had an impact in the world. Nobody really used it. I call this the product death cycle. So if you're at a startup, which is interesting though, you do that till you run out of funding and you're gone. Like, you can't do this at a startup very long. But inside big companies, you can do this for a long time because there's usually a lack of sense of urgency, and funding is not a constraint, right? If nobody uses your product, you still go into work tomorrow. You still do your job for the most time, until you don't. If you want to learn more about this, Andrew Chen actually broke it all down for me, which was very nice of him. I did not expect this. Andrew Chen is a Silicon Valley VC. He actually just went to Uber to run growth at Uber. So I'm really interested if Uber is going to use product death cycle. But my new business model is to draw cool stuff and then have people smarter than me write about it. So that's my new business model. Another reason I'm here is because of this. Most of the corporations I come into they're terrified, essentially. They see the fall from grace from about 2 years, from being on top to being bankrupt. And they just don't know how to respond to that. So they're looking for new ways of working. This Agile thing, let's take this in. This Lean Startup thing, let's bring this in. Lean UX, let's bring this in. Like, are these things going to save us from being obsolete, from being extinct? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The reason they do, I've found, is that it has to be connected to something meaningful in your strategy. If it's just like our goal is to be Agile, or our goal is to use Kanban, or our goal is to use Lean UX, or our goal is to use Lean Startup, or our goal is to use design thinking, usually that all fails spectacularly. In that, that's not the goal. The process isn't the goal. There's something behind that that's the goal that you need to have an open conversation about with leadership. Otherwise, if you hear that, our goal is to be Agile, just run away. So another reason why I'm here is this loop. How many of you read like Lean Startup and seen this before, or at least made it through 10% Lean Startup? Great. That's usually if people have made it through 10% of your book, they're like, I've totally read your book. Anyway, there's something nuanced about this build, measure, learn loop that I want to talk about today that I don't hear Eric talk enough about, which is people aren't starting with learn. Okay? So if you start with what you're going to build, right? In a big company, you get to measure, and then you may not ever make it to learn in that it's just not, you're not incentivized to learn in a big company, right? You're incentivized to ship features, right? You're incentivized to be on time, on scope, on budget. But it's nuanced. But if you start with what do you need to learn, then something really fascinating happens. So what do we need to learn about the customer, about the problem, about the market? Okay? Then what do we need to measure to learn that? And then you know what? Do we need to build anything to measure to learn that? And then how fast can we go through that cycle? Because that is fascinating. If you can make it through that cycle as a company, what you'll find from a business perspective is that your competition becomes reactive to you versus you being reactive to your competition. If you're actually shipping things into the market and learning faster than your competition, this funny thing happens where they start becoming reactive to you versus you trying to build what they did last year and catch up and always be a year behind. So it's nuanced, but what I recommend is start with what you need to learn, okay? Because if you start with what you're going to build, it's really, really hard to complete that loop, okay? So start with learn. What do I need to measure to learn that? What do I need to build to measure to learn that? And then how fast can I get through that loop as a team, as a company? Okay. So who's doing this? Well, there are a couple people doing this. Some here out in the Bay Area, actually. This is Adobe. I call it the corporate minimum viable product because Adobe is launching off-brand products without their logo. Fascinating enough in that you don't have to go through legal. You don't have to go through branding. It doesn't take 12 weeks to send out an email because they're not putting their brand on it. So what you can do, and I see this time and time again, and part of this is me evangelizing this in corporations, is that you should test the market without your logo to see if the idea stands on its own merit. And then if you find a signal, then you can bring it on brand. So these people that are struggling with Lean Startup and Lean UX and building MVPs inside corporation, time and time again, the main reason you're struggling with that is because it has to be better than perfect for us to put our logo on it. We can't put something out there that's half-baked to test the market. We'll get bad press. Our stock price will go down. I have that time and time again. We can't do this. It'll actually affect our stock price, okay? But if you test it off-brand, then if people like it, they don't like it just because you have your logo on it, okay? You don't have 10,000 people coming up the first day just to check it out because you did a big press release. And it's going to force you to find out who are my customers for this? Am I solving a real problem? And I can pivot, persevere, or kill based on real data, qualitative and quantitative, okay? So what I found is you can short circuit corporations in launching off-brand MVPs, okay? And there's more about that if you want to read it. I try to, when you guys get these slides, you'll see the Medium article. I try to break this all down and share what I can anyway. Another product they've built recently is Adobe Voice. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Adobe Voice, but it's basically an iPad storytelling app. It doesn't look like anything Adobe would ever build, right? It doesn't have all the knobs. It's not built for its very creative, deep expertise digital professional. It's built for anybody, like a nonprofit who would spend $40K to get an explainer video, can now go and use this iPad app for free and create the same quality thing, okay? But if you notice, it says the Ginger project is now available as Adobe Voice. Started off brand without the Adobe logo. They tested it in the market. They generated artifacts to see, does anybody even care about these explainer videos? And then let's back our way into building product, building software to create those repeatedly at scale. They hand rolled these. They went in and hacked them together for customers at first. They didn't build software, okay? How many of you go in your corporation and spend time hacking things together manually before you jump to software? I'm guessing probably not a lot of you. Your teams are really quick to jump to software. This team started hand rolling these, concierge, in fact. But I think it's interesting how you bring it on brand. Oh, we're now this. Now we're Adobe. And it goes to the App Store. Oh, by the way, they actually won awards from Apple for this product last year. So that's the other thing I hear. Oh, there's no good success stories. Like, this doesn't work inside corporations. Show me the case. Well, there's one. but people aren't going off and talking about it enough. This isn't the priority of corporations to jump out and say, hey, this is how we went off brand and we're going to expose all our secrets. That's not how corporations think, right? So you don't hear about the corporate examples as much, okay? But they're starting. This is one, okay? So another reason I work with corporations is because they don't want to be like this. This is Blockbuster. It doesn't look good, does it? It's like tumbleweeds and it looks like a shady part of town, actually. And when I talk about this, so why are corporations trying to build product this way? Well, look how fast Blockbuster fell from grace there. They're almost 5 billion and bankrupt, okay? This is happening scarily fast to corporations right now. So you can't continue to build product like you used to, right? You have to actually shake things up and build product a different way. Another reason I think Blockbuster went out of business is this guy. How many of you had like an amazing experience when you went to Blockbuster, when you had a late fee, for example? It was terrible. It was soul crushing. And I call those high retention, low satisfaction businesses. So most of the Fortune 100 companies that I see that are struggling right now are in this situation. They have retention, but a piece of them die inside every time they use your product or service. Like a Comcast, that's an interesting one. I actually tried to cancel or downgrade Comcast the other day, and in the phone maze, every time I said downgrade, I got disconnected. I was like, this is brilliant, right? Like, I don't know. That's a great feature, right? That's one retention strategy. Just disconnect your customer. Yeah, I still use Comcast. But another thing is like in the UX of your product, right? If there are a bunch of these little parts that make your users feel stupid, and they use your product several times a day, then they start feeling a lot stupid, okay? But there are a lot of these products out there. You can't mandate your market share. You're just primed to be disrupted. So I want to explain to you some of the things I see in real corporations about how they're approaching this. So how do we want to escape being crushed, right? And I love this. So this is out of Blue Ocean Strategy. Have any of you read Blue Ocean Strategy? A couple of you? Okay, so this might be rehashed for some of you. I love the book. However, a lot of the book isn't actionable. But the one thing I find actionable in the book is 4 actions framework, ironically enough. In that, you talk about, okay, so we can't keep competing with our competition the way that we have in the past. We need to create a new value curve. So we need to raise, create, reduce, and eliminate aspects here to create a new curve. And I'll give you an example here, so I'll make it easy. So Netflix, they took out Blockbuster. How did they do it? Okay, so we'll just have a conversation about this. So what did they raise, right? They raised selection and convenience, okay? These are aspects that were not really on par for where they thought the experience should be in the movie rental business, right? What did they create? Well, they created this idea of personalization and social sharing that didn't really exist. Okay, so that's something they actually created that was new. Okay? What did they reduce? Well, customer help, although it's probably arguable, and rental cost, right? So it wasn't as expensive. And they eliminated physical stores and late fees. Now, you could also argue that maybe late fees are part of your subscription service, but for the most part, you don't get the $40 late fee anymore. Can you see how that starts to create something new out of something that was almost red ocean before, where it's like this race to the bottom where people competing on the same features? Okay? So this is what 4 actions is. The reason I like this is that you're not only talking about what you're going to do, but you're also talking about what you're not going to do. I feel like so much of our strategy work today is just this like really optimistic future without a plan. If you read like Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, he talks a lot about this. In that, we need to have a plan. We actually need to talk about what we're not going to focus on as well. And I like this because you can start having that conversation with your team. Here are the things we're going to raise and create, but here are the things we're going to reduce. And by the way, here are the things we're actually intentionally not going to focus on at all. Okay? So let's just maybe do this as a group conversation. So what is a high retention, low satisfaction business that you would like to use for today? We already had Comcast, Rita. Does everyone want to agree on Comcast? Oh, we're actually going to do it on Netflix today? Well, that could be interesting. Okay, we have Comcast and Netflix. What else is high retention, low satisfaction that isn't a sponsor or a talk here today, maybe? United States Postal Service. Okay. Costco? DMV. All right, there's so many. Health insurance. Yeah, okay. So, all right, let's run with let's run with the post office. Actually, we'll do that one because I don't think anybody from is anyone in the post office here. Okay, so what would you raise? So if you're going to create a new value curve here, what would you raise inside the post office? What's like okay today, but you would actually dial up and increase the experience on, increase the fidelity on? Anybody, just yell it out. Opening hours? Availability. Okay. Okay. What else? Yeah. Okay. Certainty of delivery. So you pretty sure it's going to get there, but you, yeah, but on time. Okay. Okay. So okay, let's stop there. So I just a few. What would you create? So what doesn't exist in USPS today that you would create? Like what are new things that you could create? Store design. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit. Just so the actual physical design of the store is making it friendlier, more like create smiles. Ah, create an experience also. Ah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay. So some kind of notification. Okay. Good. Good. These are all good. Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. So, so not just what we're going to raise and what we're going to create, but what would we reduce? What would we actually dial back that the USPS does today that just isn't as important going forward? Saturdays, as in no delivery. You don't care about Saturday delivery. Okay. What else would you reduce? Again, you're not eliminating it. You're just not making it the focus. Junk mail. Lines. Actually, yeah, that might be an interesting conversation. Okay, and then let's move to eliminate. What would you eliminate about the USPS? Did you just feel like it's no longer relevant whatsoever going forward? Because there is a trade-off here. It's not just what you're creating and what you're raising, but it's also what you're not focusing on and then what you're eliminating altogether. Postage meters? The weight things, okay. Stamps? Get rid of stamps. Okay. What else? What else we eliminate? The office, yeah, maybe the physical locations are no longer necessary. But I think you're starting to get the sense of this, right? So if you weren't, never the way you could do this, which I say many corporations, they'll go and they'll do all this competitive analysis on what USPS does now, and they'll just try to do that cheaper or do that faster. That's not what I'm advocating here, right? I'm advocating to say, you're actually going to create a new market that doesn't even compete with USPS, right? The famous example inside the book is Cirque du Soleil, right? All those folks came out of the circus, but they eliminated animals, right? There are no animals in the act. They eliminated, they reduced the rings. There's no more 3 rings, right? In Cirque du Soleil. It's a themed experience. They raised the whole, the art direction, right? It's just like a theater almost experience. And they created this almost like completely new thing. But they came out of the circus. They don't compete. Does Cirque du Soleil compete with a circus, do you think? They disrupted the circus. Yeah, exactly. So this, as you can see, we all did this as a group conversation. Granted, you'd spend a little more time with your team, but it's a good thing to use in that you can also talk about openly with the team what you're not going to focus on in your strategy. So, yes. Yeah. So it takes work, right? So it's very context specific in the kind of company or the new kind of company or new product line you're trying to create. Hold that question. I'm going to go through some more stuff, and then maybe we can come back to see. Because basically, I'm biased towards launching things in the market to test, is what. So it may not be a singularity here. It may be you have a series that all compete. Yeah. Okay. But then that's not trivial too. So let's go through some of that. So coming back to Netflix. So the way I see this paired is with horizon planning. Okay. Are you guys familiar with horizon planning at all? Some of you? Yeah. I'll just give you a really basic level of horizon planning here. But so your horizon 1 is like your cash cow, your core business. You can make incremental changes to that business and predict the ROI. Okay. So it's like sustaining innovation. If you think sustaining and disruptive, it's more sustaining. Horizon 2 are like these adolescent new businesses. They're not something completely new and disruptive. They have legs now, but they need a lot of help, right? They're not a core business yet inside your company. And then Horizon 3 is more this disruptive innovation, right? So if you're going to have an innovation strategy and you're going to use 4 actions, usually I see it on Horizon 3, okay? Now, to give you some examples. So let's use Netflix again. Horizon 1 on Netflix, their DVDs. Actually, their DVDs are still raking in the money. It's almost like AOL with with connectivity. You're like, oh, that can't be a business. And then you see the numbers and you're like, oh, whoa, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh, yes. Yes. No, full disclaimer, I've been at AOL before. And the streaming business, obviously, is becoming kind of their cash cow at Netflix, right? So this is some data. Again, DVD by mail is still really, really strong. It's not dead. It's still a big part of their business. Horizon 2 at Netflix is kind of like this personalized content they're creating, like House of Cards. Interesting enough, do anyone know the stuff that came before House of Cards? Were any of you watching Netflix? Like there were actually some other shows that just the documentaries, but they had some other series that before House of Cards was like the big kind of bang, but they had been testing that a while, right? If you look at the Emmys, so last year's Emmys anyway, they're challenging. You can see Netflix. I mean, they beat out AMC, Showtime, Comedy Central, Fox, Lifetime. Like this is something they're committed to, right? This is more of the adolescent business inside Netflix. But what's their Horizon 3 at Netflix? Personally, I don't know. I don't know what Horizon 3 is Netflix. Now, what I can say is if I go inside and see who they're hiring, Netflix is going off of quantitative and qualitative. There's a mix, right? It's not just the what people are doing, but it's the why they're doing it, okay? So I don't have any insider trade knowledge on Netflix on what they're doing in Horizon 3, but it's like deep sea diving. You're going down 10 times and you come up once with something, right? And then that transitions to H2 and then finally transitions to H1, okay? So when we're talking about Agile and innovation strategy, this is really how it plays out inside companies. Now, come back to innovation accounting. So this innovation stuff's all great. Red Lean Startup, there's a part of innovation accounting in there, and I still don't know what it is. That's basically what I hear. Innovation accounting is probably the most impactful, least understood part of Lean Startup. And it's where I've been focused the last 3 or 4 years, trying to make sure that we're really capturing what this stuff's about and using it in a real way. This is Eric's definition, which I like for the most part, except it's about holding people accountable. And I feel like where I'm seeing this in corporations, it's actually changing the accountability structure. So, for example, and I'll get into that. So think about what's far over here in your market. So the bottom being quantitative and the top being qualitative. Okay? So if you're going to build a new thing, you're going to have to find out who your customer is, where are they online, where are they offline. Quantitatively, you can measure acquisition, but qualitatively, you're going to have to measure, are they even aware that this thing exists anymore? Okay? Because if they're not aware you exist, then they're not going to come to your thing. Like Tristan would say, like people go in and they launch landing pages, and then they go, now what? I have a landing page. I see that all the time. I'm sure you never see that, but I see that all the time. And it's because they don't know. The fun part was creating the landing page. The much, much harder part was, where are these people? How do they find our landing page? Will they actually sign up? Do they understand our value prop? All that great stuff. But you can measure that. So let's say you've built an MVP of your new thing. Then how do people become active in that, right? What does active mean? I do a lot of startup advice. I advise mobile startups. And they get really caught up in downloads. So they're on TechCrunch. It's like 7 million downloads. That's great. How many of you download stuff and then delete it right away? Yeah, me too. If you look at Andrew Chen's recent write-up on mobile, about 8 out of 10 people churn out of iOS right now. So you have about 80% churn rate if you weren't depressed already. These people are not active users, by the way. They've downloaded and then they've uninstalled. They did not become active. But what could be something that people would do to become active? Like, any ideas? A purchase, right? They create an account. There's something more than just looking at you and fleeing. Yeah, and then on the flip side, they're becoming hopeful, right? So the qualitative side of this is, how are they becoming hopeful that your thing solves some kind of problem? Beyond that, are they coming back? Retention, okay? So not only are they aware and they're becoming hopeful, but now they're becoming satisfied because they've come back and used your product time and time again. Now you still have to check, because like I said, high retention, low satisfaction, you still have to go and check to see, are they really becoming satisfied? And retention is not just cumulative retention metrics, it's also, is that trending? Are people coming back shorter, or is it going to be longer, right? So if you're a startup, any good VC is going to want to get below cumulative numbers. They're going to want to know, are you trending your customer base? The cohorts coming through, are they coming back sooner, or is it taking them longer to come back? And what are the classes of user coming through? One of the things that really resonated with me was David Anderson's talk on classes of user inside customer segments. I thought that was brilliant, because that's what I've been experiencing in this framework, is that you'll have different classes of customer come through. Some will love it and they'll use it every day. Some will come back maybe once a month. Some will come back maybe never, right? And we, all the time, I see this time and time again, we always overestimate how quickly people will come back and use it, okay? So don't get depressed if you overestimate that, but have some hypotheses behind, well, how do we improve this retention? Referral. So not only are they coming in and they're activating and they're coming back, but there's this passionate part that goes off and evangelizes you in the market. If you look at that loop, that would be what Eric describes as your engine of growth, okay? So that, if you have paid acquisition, that referral can actually save you on acquisition costs, because your customers love you so much, they're going out and evangelizing you to the market. But not only referring, but they're also passionate, okay? So I often question the people that become instantly passionate about your product. Maybe. They usually go through a progression, right? They need to be aware that you exist. They need to be hopeful that you solve a real problem. They need to become satisfied after trying your thing. And then eventually they'll become passionate, a smaller section, right? So there are drop-offs on every part of this flow, okay? But if you can actually talk about that flow, that's the first step, right? If I go into corporations, I have time and time again said, like, okay, you have these passionate customers. I ask, why are they passionate? And I don't hear good answers. Some people just say, I don't know. They sing the jingle, they love us. We have no idea how they became passionate. If you don't know from a product perspective how you've created passionate customers, then how are you ever going to reduce friction in that and create more? You can't, because you haven't even mapped out how they're becoming passionate, okay? And then finally, revenue, right? You need to be able to generate revenue for your business. A lot of the innovation work, I see innovation labs getting shut down here in the Bay Area recently. My hypothesis behind that is that they're off testing things internally, so they're not externally focused. They're not following this framework, which I'm trying to help them follow now. And the real business, when you go from H3 to H2, there's no H2 transition, because they can't find out where that thing you've created in the innovation lab fits into the business in any meaningful way, okay? So when people ask you, what is innovation accounting? My current take on innovation accounting, after probing and trying this in corporations for several years, is a mashup of pirate metrics. So are you familiar with pirate metrics? R, AARRR, that's why it's called pirate metrics. Acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue. So that comes from Dave McClure. And what Brant and Patrick wrote about in Lean Entrepreneur I found fascinating, in that the transition that customers go through, becoming aware, hopeful, satisfied, passionate. Okay? Now, there's a lot to take in for a second. So, if you looked at your business this way, okay, you're going to have risky assumptions probably at every step of the way. But some of you are already in flight. You've already built stuff. It's probably already has customers. You kind of have a backlog and you're burning it down. But one, are you measuring this qualitatively and quantitatively? And two, where are your risks? Do you have really high activation and then no one comes back? Then why? You probably aren't going to solve that by adding more stories to your backlog and burning those down and releasing features. that might be actually a negative effect. Features are almost the worst measure of progress in software development. You can actually destroy value by adding features to your product. I've seen that time and time again. If you have these product principles or something needs to do something really well and get out of the user's way, and you add features in, it actually prevents them from doing that. So instead of just throwing features at it, what are your hypotheses around why people aren't coming back? And then how would you go test those hypotheses? Okay? So, interesting thought exercise. Let's come back to the USPS that we're creating. So, where do we think the biggest risk would be in creating the new version of the USPS? Would it be just getting people to become aware of our new USPS killer? Would it be people using it? Would it be people coming back? Would it be people referring each other? Would it be revenue? We can just have an open conversation about this. What do you think? Anyone? So retention. So you think people would say, oh, this is kind of cool. They say they're better than USPS. I tried it once. It wasn't that great. I'm not coming back. Interesting. You know, something I didn't draw up here is that negative referral loop, in that if you create angry customers that hate you, that they also go out in the market. That would be a different arrow. Working against that arrow. Okay. What else? Referral. How so? Right. So this idea of we have some active customers, but there's just no growth strategy in the sense of how do we acquire more customers without just paying money to acquire them. So what would referral look like in a delivery service? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. So you would compare the growth of UPS and FedEx and see if we are on a current trajectory. Okay, interesting. Who else? Acquisition? Yeah. Why so? If you can't get acquisition, you can't get retention. This is true. You know, there actually there's no right wrong answer here. I've actually seen both styles, okay? So teams that I work with that start thinking this way, one, they start thinking about hypotheses behind their features, okay? So they've had a conversation about what they're going to focus on and what they're not going to focus on, and they have an opinion about why, or some guesses at least, of why things are happening in their product, and what are some ways they would try different experiments to change and move the needle, okay? So some teams I work with, they methodically work through each section of this, just like I explained it to you. They start with acquisition, they move on to activation, then they try to figure out retention, then they try to figure out referral. You know, if you've actually figured out those metrics and you have a healthy product, the revenue thing typically comes easy there. Not always, but you could probably create a business model behind that, okay? There are enough creative business models today. I work with other teams where, let's say your entire product is based on referral. The make or break part of your product, because it's integrated into social media, we have to focus on referral. We have to have a really strong referral loop. They'll actually build enough of the skeleton of this to get the referral and then start testing, okay? So they don't as methodically walk through each part, okay? But it's a really interesting thing that happens in that we're not just burning down a backlog of stories for our product, we're using data to shape the backlog, okay? So I'm not saying be completely data-driven here, but at least be data-influenced, okay? In that, you're not just creating a bunch more features in your backlog and burning those down, okay? So, coming back to the accountability part of this, the other fascinating thing I see happening in corporations right now is this flip on accountability, okay? Most corporations I go into, accountability is not like this healthy thing that happens, okay? It's more of I'm being held accountable, right? So a bunch of heroic leaders who are experts, who have the answers, and tasks get farmed out, and people are held accountable to completing tasks. They're held accountable to completing stories. They're held accountable to hitting their velocity. Okay? What do you think is the downfall of that style? Anybody? Or do you agree with that style? I'm open to that too. Yeah, so lack of transparency, finding ways to stay out of trouble. There's no safety. Right. Now, so if I want to really depress you, you can take that style, pull it back to the industrial era. This is how we manage people in factories, right? But it didn't start there. If you pull that thread even further, it goes back to slave plantations. So think about slave owners and plantation owners. When they became absentee plantation owners, they had people in charge of managing the slaves and managing how many crops, what's your crop quota for today, incentivizing people against each other, farming out tasks, having incomplete tasks. So it's really depressing in the sense that it goes back that far, right? We've been managing people this way for that long. And in 2015, we're using a methodology that's basically from the 1970s. And we're using management technique from 1920s that even goes back beyond before then. So, depression aside, what I see changing is if you're going to go fast and you're going to not be obsolete as a company, then the accountability model has to change inside corporations. In that, teams are giving an account of how they're making progress instead of being held accountable to completing tasks, completing stories. So, this framework is really interesting to me in that if you set this up well and you're making pivot, persevere, kill decisions on new product initiatives, then the teams have the space to do discovery and they give an account of how they're making progress using these metrics. Okay? This is what we tried to learn. Here are our hypotheses. Here are the experiments we ran. Oh, by the way, these experiments were acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue experiments, right? So there's a focus to the experimentation, not just experimenting to see what happens. Here's what we found. Here's what we recommend we do next. That is a conversation with leadership that's already on the calendar 3 months out or further. It's already on the calendar because you know your runway. You have a sense of urgency now as a team. And no one gets fired if you kill the product. That's the important part too. Okay? That is how accountability is changing inside corporations today in a real way. Not just saying empowered teams, go be empowered. It's more of I lead with questions as a leader, and we decide as a team together, do we pivot, persevere, or kill this initiative? Okay? So, why this happens is because corporations aren't lacking ideas, right? So I go into corporations, no one is lacking ideas. They just don't know how to invest in the ideas. And this is giving corporations and leadership a real way to invest in the ideas. So let me break this down at a high level again for you. So you have a bunch of ideas inside your corporation. You want to be able to take that from just an idea, because anyone can have an idea, to what's the opportunity? Okay, so what's the opportunity for that idea? And then can we create a team that's focused on that opportunity that can test in the market for 12 weeks and then make an investment decision on whether we pivot, persevere, or kill that opportunity? Okay? So a couple of really interesting things happen here. It changes the funding model of innovation inside corporations. It's no longer, I'm going to fund this team of 20 with $5 million and they're going to build for a year. It takes 12 weeks for that team just to get started. And they're probably multitasking. This cross-functional team, product design, engineering, maybe marketing, maybe even some finance, focused, rapidly iterating through 12 weeks, going through the build, measure, learn cycle, testing in the market, and then bringing qualitative and quantitative data to that conversation with leadership. Okay? That's how this is changing. This is how people are building products. Corporations that don't want to be like Blockbuster, this is how they're starting to approach product development. It fits in really well with Agile in that when you find a signal, you're going to have to increase fidelity in the team. You're going to increase your transaction cost. You're going to have to build it out. That's where Agile shines, okay? Because if that was a big waterfall handoff and you build it 6 months later, the market's probably already moved on, okay? So what do those ceremonies look like? They look really similar to Agile in a way. Daily stand-ups, cross-functional team. These are much more about the experiment, the discovery work, right? What task are we working on as far as the experiment goes? I love what's our daily goal, because if we have a daily goal as a team, then we're much more willing to unblock each other. It's less like a robot stand-up. It's more like, hey, what are we trying to do today? Okay, how do we do that? And let's have a conversation as a team. How do we get there? Okay? Planning. Still do reviews, still do planning, but it's usually on a weekly basis. 2 weeks running this style, 2 weeks, a lot can go off the rails in 2 weeks. That seems like a really long time to me. Usually the teams I'm working with that are rapidly experimenting have weekly plannings, okay? And these are a little longer. We also bring in stakeholders, because if you're going to review work, you should have your stakeholders there. We talk about the data we found and how it shapes our strategy. But the big one, so you guys probably get this, like daily stand-ups, reviews, okay, we got it, is this one. Pivot, persevere, kill, okay? If you don't set that up in advance, then you're going to make very bad decisions in a high anxiety, high stress environment, okay? You're going to experiment. Leadership may or may be with you on what you're doing. If the perception is you've gone too long, they're going to come in and blow up the team, okay? But if you put this on the calendar and say, look, we're going to be funded for 3 months, and we're going to all come together and decide, it creates that sense of urgency that's lacking in so many of the corporations I go into. If you really empower the teams to give an account of how they're making progress to this decision, that's actually empowering the team versus saying you're not hitting your velocity, you're not burning your backlog fast enough. Build, build, build. Okay? This is if you don't do anything else, do this. Because without this, it's not going to change how you make decisions as a corporation. You're going to be agile, but you're still going to be releasing things potentially that nobody cares about. And that's really not what we're here for, or at least most people I know. And this one has to have leadership involved. And when leaders get this well, they're leading with questions, not with answers. They're not saying, oh, ship this feature on this date and hit this milestone. It's, what experiments did you run? What did you learn? What do you want to try next? When I see this go really well inside a corporation, the team is onto something and the leader goes, hey, you know what? We have this other initiative way over here that's kind of similar. We should figure out how to make you successful and have you work together. Did that last year. Company launched it in October to applause from around the world. But the leader knew that he had the broad perspective that other things were going on in the organization, that they could actually bring these teams together in a real way and have them work. Versus throw it over the wall and then have it be at the bottom of the backlog and never get work done. Okay. So, to recap, there's a lot I'm throwing at you today. Actionable strategy. So, don't just talk about the things you want to do. Actually talk about the things that you're going to reduce, things that you're actually not going to focus on. That's really, really important. Empowering teams to give an account. Acquisition, activation, retention, referral. These are all leading indicators. Revenue is a lagging indicator. Repeat after me. Revenue, lagging indicator. These are all leading indicators. These are going to be much better to measure progress. Unless you pre-sell, yeah, exactly. But these metrics are going to be much more indicative of whether you're going to hockey stick or not. Okay? Measuring ROI on that flat part doesn't go so well. Creating a sense of urgency in Horizon 3 is really, really important. Because without that sense of urgency, people are just going to zombie along, and whether people use it or not isn't going to matter as much. There's not going to be a sense of urgency. That's why people in startups stay at startups and they don't go to big corporations, because they have that sense of urgency at startups. If they can't create revenue, they go out of business. So, we have quick time for Q&A, I think. Questions on all of this I threw at you. This is all I have. The last slide? Yeah. Oh, I have a final last slide, which I'll share with you in a second. But it's not as informal as this. Yeah.
Would you say this applies to all 3 horizons?
This mostly applies to Horizon 3. Although I push the envelope and I experiment on cash cow products all the time, because I feel like if you don't, and that's more at the incremental feature level, that you just kind of ride this slow decline into mediocrity, because you can't have that H1 be an H1 by not experimenting on it. But the tactics look a little different, in that you're probably experimenting at a service or feature level. It's a lot of A/B testing, feature fakes, that kind of stuff. Under 2 pizzas for that team. So you want a small focus team, cross-functional, to move at the speed you need for 12 weeks. 12 weeks is my current understanding of this because I've been trying different time boxes. It could be shorter or longer for you, but 12 weeks seems about the right because I don't want people to give up on that first failed experiment, but I don't want them to experiment forever and keep trying the same thing a different way. So 12 weeks seems about right for me. But yes, smaller than 2 pizzas. I don't want a team of 20 running on this for 12 weeks. Yeah.
Is it dedicated team or do they have other work?
Dedicated team. If they have other work, it's going to slow the whole thing down, which is pulls at that thread of focus as well. Yeah.
How do you deal with defining investment theses for the executives?
So that's my current challenge at the moment, and why I'm working with leadership more is that to get the money set aside to fund these teams is surprisingly hard. In that, if I'm a startup and I raise money, I don't have the VC usually come and take my money away. But in corporations, that happens all the time. In that your budget's $1 million. Oh wait, now your budget's $300K. What happened there? Well, we rerouted that around other things we needed. You're just going to have to deal with that and keep the same scope.
Or like literally, like how do you get them to choose the projects based on company strategy and not just random projects that prove success and then still can't get funded because they're like, we don't get it.
Yeah. So what's worked out really well is internal shark tanks, where you have product managers and executive leadership in a room basically doing a shark tank on how this thing's going to impact the strategy of the company. And then we choose one to make an investment decision. Again, 12 weeks isn't very long. If you add up that team size, it's like 350 grand, something like that, versus throwing millions and millions of dollars of huge teams. So the internal shark tanks worked out pretty well so far. Yeah.
So in the 12 weeks, you go through the loop 12 times?
I don't know if I count how many times you go through the loop, but you have a series of hypotheses all along the way using the innovation accounting framework that I laid out.
So what you build must be really, really small.
What you build is an MVP, and you may throw it away entirely and rebuild it again if you have a signal. Because you didn't build it the right way, probably. You build it to generate data to make an investment decision. And that's a key point too, in that if you don't set that expectation from the beginning, stakeholders see it and say, great, launch that thing to millions of customers, and you're like, whoa, we have all this tech debt. So I wouldn't advocate that. Be very clear at the beginning what an MVP does, this is my definition, to generate qualitative and quantitative data to make an informed investment decision. That's all it's for. And then you'll completely throw it away and rebuild it. Versus something like a prototype or something where you've already, or a pilot where you've already invested in, hey, yeah, we built this thing, we're going to keep it around, and we're just going to throw more people at it and make it better, which doesn't usually work so well. So one other thing I want to show you before we wrap up is this. This is a super important part of the slide. This is a Deskla. It's a Tesla, but it's a desk. It cost about $70,000 to make. It's in San Mateo in an accelerator. And if anyone asks you, like, hey, I'm in Silicon Valley for this conference, and I don't know if there's really a tech bubble or not. Deskla. Just get Desklas for your whole team, and you'll be set. You don't have to measure anything. They'll just be innovative. Oh, by the way, it plugs in, and the lights come on and everything. It's amazing. But for real, so that was my Twitter handle at the bottom. You know, I'm a Twitter addict. You can get a hold of me there. And that's my email, david@neo. So really easy to remember. If you have any questions, I'll make sure these slides get to everybody. But if you have any questions, just ping me. It doesn't have to be anything formal. But thank you.